The Galactic Empire teetered on the edge of despair. For over a century, they had waged a desperate war against the Crixer swarm, a merciless, hive-minded enemy that sought to consume all in its path. Once proud fleets now drifted as fields of wreckage, their captains and crews reduced to whispers in the void. Planets, lush and teeming with life, had been reduced to barren husks. The Empire, a coalition of some of the most advanced species in the galaxy, was no closer to victory than when the war had begun. In the Grand Hall of Concordance, beneath the immense crystalline dome that shimmered with the light of a dozen alien suns, Emperor Varyon sat with a heavy heart. His golden robes of office, adorned with ancient insignias of unity and strength, seemed to weigh him down as though he carried the Empire's burdens in their threads. Around him sat the Council of Strategic Accord, a gathering of the finest minds and most seasoned generals the Empire had to offer. Yet, today, even their collective brilliance seemed dimmed by the specter of failure. General Karen, his forearms crossed tightly against his muscular torso, broke the tense silence. Our forces are depleted. The Crixer have adapted to every tactic we've thrown at them. We cannot endure this war much longer. His voice, deep and resonant, reverberated through the chamber. Karen was known for his unyielding nature, but even he sounded on the verge of capitulation. A murmur rippled through the council, alien voices conveying shades of fear and frustration. Chancellor Adrex, a serpent-like being with scales that shimmered like molten silver, hissed, "We need allies, Emperor. Our fleets alone cannot stem the tide." Allies? Karen barked. Who remains to ally with? The Zarn fled into their nebulas. The Andari refused to leave their sanctuaries, and the humans, he trailed off, his disdain palpable. The mention of humans brought a flicker of interest to the Emperor's tired eyes. The humans? They remained on the sidelines of this war, haven't they? He mused, his voice steady but weary. They have, Adrex confirmed. They claim neutrality. A peaceful species, or so they say. But they have avoided the Crixer's wrath. We know little of their true capabilities. Karen snorted, the sound guttural and disdainful. Capabilities? They are primitives compared to us, a species that only recently unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel. Diplomats and traders, nothing more. The Emperor raised a hand to silence the general's tirade. And yet they have endured. While other civilizations crumbled before the Crixer, Earth remains untouched. There is a strength in them, Karen. Whether you see it or not, it was decided. An envoy would be sent to Earth to secure humanity's aid. It was a desperate gamble. But desperation was all the Empire had left. The human diplomat Carl Morgan was staring out the window of his office in Geneva when he received the transmission. The towering spires of the United Nations headquarters stretched skyward, bathed in the orange glow of a setting sun. Below, the city hummed with activity, its people blissfully unaware of the galactic conflict raging light years away. Morgan envied their ignorance. He turned back to his desk, where a holographic display hovered. On it was the visage of Commander Ulrich, the Empire's chosen envoy. Ulrich was a tall, imposing figure with azure skin that shimmered faintly, as though lit from within. His crimson uniform bore the insignia of the Imperial Fleet, a symbol of authority that demanded respect. "Mr. Morgan," Ulrich began, his tone clipped and formal, "I speak on behalf of the Galactic Empire. Our war with the Crixer swarm threatens all sentient life in this galaxy, including your own. We request humanity's assistance." Morgan's expression betrayed nothing, though his mind raced. He had been expecting this moment for years, ever since humanity had first been contacted by the Empire. Still, hearing the plea firsthand carried a weight he had not anticipated. "Commander Ulrich," Morgan replied, his voice calm and measured, "humanity has maintained a policy of neutrality in galactic affairs. We are not warriors. Our resources are devoted to diplomacy, science, and exploration, not war." Ulrich's eyes narrowed, his frustration evident. "Neutrality will not save you when the Crixer turn their gaze toward Earth. They are a scourge that leaves no world unscathed. Do you think your peaceful ideals will matter when they descend upon your people? Morgan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. And yet, they have not come for us. Perhaps they see no value in a world that does not challenge them. Ulrich's fists clenched at his sides, but he kept his tone controlled. Do not mistake their current focus for safety. The Empire once believed the Crixer could be ignored. Now, we are fighting for our very survival. The two men locked eyes, the tension between them palpable. Ulrich saw humanity as the Empire's last hope, a potential ally that could tip the scales of the war. Morgan saw a galaxy desperate to drag Earth into a conflict it had no stake in. Both understood the stakes, but neither would yield easily. Humanity's history, Morgan began after a long pause, is riddled with wars. Wars fought for survival, for power, for ideals. We have seen the cost of such conflicts, Commander. Millions dead, planets scarred, entire generations lost. We have chosen a different path because we know too well what war brings. Ulrich's frustration gave way to something akin to desperation. And what will your peace bring when the Crixer come for you? Will you stand idly by as your cities burn and your people are consumed? Morgan did not answer immediately. He looked past the hologram to the skyline outside, the last rays of sunlight disappearing behind the horizon. In the growing darkness, the lights of the city came alive, a testament to humanity's resilience. He thought of the countless lives represented by those lights, the generations that had fought and struggled to build a world worth protecting. I will take your request to my superiors, Morgan said finally, his voice steady but non-committal. But understand this, Commander. Humanity does not act out of fear. If we choose to fight, it will be because we believe it is the right thing to do, not because we are pressured into it. Ulrich's expression softened, though the tension in his posture remained. That is all I can ask, Mr. Morgan. The Empire awaits your answer. Do not delay. Time is a luxury we no longer have. The transmission ended, leaving Morgan alone in his office. He stared at the empty space where Ulrich's image had been, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. Humanity had been content to watch the galaxy's wars from afar, confident in their isolation. But now, the war had come to their doorstep, and Morgan knew the decision he faced could change the course of human history forever. As the city outside his window continued to glow, Morgan made a silent vow. Whatever choice humanity made, it would not be made lightly. The weight of countless lives, both human and alien, rested on his shoulders. And though he did not yet know what decision he would make, one thing was certain. The days of humanity watching from the sidelines were coming to an end. The holographic feed filled the room with a cold blue light, casting shadows across the faces of the assembled leaders. The projection showed the aftermath of the Crixer's latest attack. Once a thriving planet, now a barren wasteland. The devastation was absolute. The ruined husks of cities stretched across a lifeless plain of ash, where only days earlier billions had lived, worked, and dreamed. Silence filled the United Nations Strategic Council chamber, broken only by the faint hum of the projector. Carl Morgan stood at the edge of the display, his jaw tight and his eyes unflinching. He could feel the weight of the room bearing down on him, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How long can we pretend this is not our fight? He turned toward the council, a mix of generals, politicians, and advisors from every corner of Earth. Their faces reflected a spectrum of emotions: shock, horror, and, for some, a flicker of fear. Admiral Marcus Trent, a man whose presence filled the room as much as his broad-shouldered frame, broke the silence. This, he said, gesturing to the carnage on the screen, is what the Crixer bring. Wherever they go, this is what's left behind. How long do we think Earth will remain an exception? Morgan folded his arms, his voice calm but firm. The Crixer haven't come for us yet. There's no evidence to suggest Earth is their next target. No evidence? Trent's voice rose, his frustration sharp. You're gambling with billions of lives, Morgan. The Crixer don't need a reason. They didn't attack the Lothar system for resources or strategic value. They destroyed it because they could. You think they'll spare Earth out of some twisted sense of diplomacy? We need to act now. Across the table, Dr. Isaac Mendez, an older man with a meticulous demeanor, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. We must not let fear dictate our decisions, Admiral. History is rife with examples of nations and civilizations destroyed by their own impulsive need to strike first. Humanity's greatest strength lies in its restraint. And what happens when restraint becomes cowardice? Trent shot back. We've spent decades preparing for this. You know as well as I do that our military isn't as underdeveloped as we've let the galaxy believe. Morgan raised an eyebrow at Trent's bluntness, but the room stirred with murmurs of agreement. Humanity's fleets, though never flaunted, were no secret among those in the know. Earth's decades of isolation had not been idle. Quietly, they had built their defenses, designed their warships, and honed their soldiers, just in case the peace they clung to so desperately ever failed. Yet deploying that strength was a line they had vowed not to cross. "This isn't about whether we can fight," Morgan said, his voice cutting through the noise. "It's about whether we should. If we join this war, we commit humanity to a path we cannot walk back. We've stayed out of galactic conflicts because we've seen what war does. To our enemies, to ourselves, and what will neutrality do?" Trent pressed, his tone heavy with disdain. "Buy us a few more years before the Crixer turn their attention here. Let us watch the Empire fall while we pat ourselves on the back for being principled. Enough with the moral posturing, Morgan. If you want to save humanity, you have to stop pretending we're above this." Morgan inhaled sharply, his fingers curling into a fist at his side. He had fought his own wars once. Before politics had claimed him, he had seen the price of action, the weight of decisions that could never be undone. But before he could respond, the doors to the chamber swung open, and a junior officer stepped in, his face pale. "Apologies for the interruption," the officer said, his voice trembling. "We've just received a transmission from the Empire. The Crixer attacked the Helion cluster. Casualties are estimated at 8 billion. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Morgan felt the air leave his lungs as the number settled over him like a stone. 8 billion lives, entire generations, wiped away in a single moment. He thought of the children, the families, the people who had lived their lives unaware their world would be gone in an instant. The silence that followed was suffocating. Admiral Trent leaned back in his chair, his expression grim but vindicated. "How much longer are we going to sit on the sidelines, Morgan? When will it be enough?" Morgan didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind raced, each thought heavier than the last. Humanity had built its isolationist policies on the scars of its past. Earth had seen enough wars to last lifetimes, and those wounds had shaped its leaders into diplomats rather than conquerors. Yet the cost of inaction was becoming unbearable. How could they justify neutrality when atrocities like this were happening light years away? How could he? Later that night, Morgan sat alone in his office, the weight of the day pressing down on him. The skyline of Geneva stretched before him, the city aglow with the lights of 1,000,000 lives. He could hear the distant hum of transport drones and the faint buzz of life moving on, blissfully unaware of the decisions being made behind closed doors. Decisions that could determine whether those lights ever dimmed. A soft chime broke the silence, signaling an incoming message. Morgan hesitated before answering, and the holographic image of Commander Ulrich materialized before him. The alien envoy looked weary. His usual rigid posture slumped slightly. "I assume you've heard," Ulrich began without preamble, his voice devoid of the frustration it had carried before. "The Helion cluster is gone." Morgan nodded. "I heard." "We are running out of time," Ulrich said, his tone pleading. "The Crixer will not stop. Even now, our forces are stretched thin. The Empire cannot hold them back alone. If Earth has any shred of decency, you'll stand with us." Morgan rubbed his temples, exhaustion clawing at the edges of his resolve. "You think I don't care, Commander? I've seen war. I've lived through it. I know what it costs. Then you should know what it costs to do nothing, Ulrich countered. We don't need words, Morgan. We need action. Ulrich's image flickered and disappeared, leaving Morgan alone once more. He stared at the empty space, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had spent his life championing peace, believing that humanity could rise above its violent past. But the galaxy didn't care about humanity's ideals. The Crixer didn't care. And in the face of such devastation, his principles felt like sand slipping through his fingers. The next morning, the United Nations reconvened, the council chamber packed with officials and spectators. Morgan stood at the podium, his expression hard but resolute. The room quieted as he began to speak. I have spent my life believing that humanity's greatest strength is its ability to choose peace over conflict, diplomacy over war. We've watched the galaxy burn, hoping to remain untouched, telling ourselves it wasn't our fight. He paused, his voice steady but filled with a deep sorrow. But how can we call ourselves peaceful when we turn a blind eye to genocide? How can we claim the moral high ground when billions cry out for help and we refuse to act? The chamber was silent as Morgan's words sank in. We are not joining this war because we seek vengeance. We are not joining because we want power. We are joining because it is the right thing to do. Enough is enough. Humanity will no longer stand on the sidelines. As his final words echoed through the chamber, Morgan saw the mixture of reactions in the room. Relief, resolve, and in some fear. But there was no turning back now. Humanity had made its choice, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again. The cold void of space was deceptively tranquil, a silent canvas stretched endlessly, hiding the chaos about to erupt. At the edge of the Crixer-invaded sectors, a fleet of ships emerged from the shimmering tier of hyperspace, their sleek, angular designs betraying the meticulous precision of their creators. Earth's first battle fleet, a force that had existed in shadow, honed in secrecy, now moved into the light, ready to make its mark on the galactic stage. Carl Morgan stood on the bridge of the Erebus, Earth's flagship and the pride of its navy. The ship was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, a towering dreadnought bristling with railguns, plasma cannons, and experimental energy weapons that gleamed under the harsh illumination of distant stars. Its hull was a deep black, designed to absorb radar and light, a predator lurking in the dark. Around it, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers spread out in a battle formation, their engines glowing faintly as they powered toward their objective. Morgan wasn't alone on the bridge. Admiral Marcus Trent stood beside him, his posture rigid, his sharp eyes scanning the fleet's tactical displays. Engineers, officers, and tactical specialists worked feverishly at their stations, the glow of their consoles painting their faces with hues of green and blue. The air was heavy with tension, yet there was a sense of grim determination in every movement, every command. This was a moment they had prepared for, one they could no longer avoid. Status report, Trent barked, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of machinery. Lieutenant Carter, a wiry man with a calm demeanor, responded without hesitation. Fleet cohesion is optimal. All ships reporting green across the board. Weapon systems primed and shields fully operational. Enemy presence detected 2 light minutes out. Crixer swarm formation consistent with prior intelligence. Morgan shifted his gaze to the forward viewport, where the darkness was interrupted by faint pinpricks of light. The Crixer fleet, an approaching storm of biological dread. Their ships resembled vast, twisted amalgamations of bone and chitin, each pulsating faintly with a sickly bioluminescence. The swarm moved with terrifying unity, as though a single mind directed every motion. It was a stark contrast to the rigid discipline of the human fleet, an organic tide against the precision of metal and fire. Trent crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "This is it," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see if all those years of preparation were worth it." Morgan's voice was low, but steady. "We didn't come this far to falter now. Humanity has survived too much to be broken here." The Admiral gave him a brief nod before turning to the tactical display. Initiate Operation Iron Fist. Launch the Vanguard. I want every ship in position before they know what hit them. A series of confirmations echoed across the bridge, and the fleet sprang into action. Carriers opened their bays, releasing squadrons of fighters that surged forward in tight formations. Each craft was a marvel of human engineering, equipped with adaptive shielding and cutting-edge AI systems to counter the Krixer's swarm tactics. Meanwhile, cruisers and destroyers advanced, their weapons locking onto targets with ruthless precision. Enemy fleet within weapons range, Carter reported. They've detected us. Krixer ships accelerating to intercept. Trent allowed himself a faint smirk. Let them come. The Krixer swarm surged forward like a tidal wave, their ships moving with an almost predatory grace. But as they closed the distance, the human fleet struck. The Erebus fired first, its railguns releasing kinetic slugs that tore through the void at unimaginable speeds. Each impact shattered Krixer vessels, sending fragments spiraling into the abyss. Plasma cannons followed, their brilliant blue bolts cutting swaths through the swarm, incinerating anything in their path. The smaller human ships joined the fray, their coordinated maneuvers outpacing the chaotic aggression of the Krixer. Fighters weaved through the swarm, their AI-piloted systems executing maneuvers too complex for any organic pilot to match. Missiles streaked through the battlefield, their warheads detonating with precision, carving openings in the enemy formation. Yet, for every Krixer ship destroyed, more seemed to take its place. The swarm was unrelenting, driven by a hive mind that knew neither fear nor mercy. The Erebus shuddered as enemy fire impacted its shields, the protective barrier flaring brightly before stabilizing. On the bridge, alarms blared, but the crew worked with practiced efficiency, adjusting shield frequencies and returning fire. They're adapting, Carter warned. Krixer ships shifting tactics to target our smaller vessels. Send in the heavies, Trent ordered. Let's remind them what they're dealing with. At his command, the fleet's battleships moved into position, their immense firepower unleashing devastation upon the enemy. Beam weapons lanced out, cutting through multiple Krixer ships in a single strike. The Erebus deployed its experimental graviton cannon, a weapon that bent space itself to crush anything caught in its field. The Krixer, for all their numbers, had never faced anything like it. But the swarm wasn't defeated so easily. Krixer ships began to sacrifice themselves, ramming into human vessels in a desperate attempt to break their formation. The human fleet held firm, but the cost was mounting. A destroyer exploded in a blinding flash, its remains scattering into the void. A carrier lost its engines, drifting helplessly as enemy ships swarmed it. Morgan gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists. How many more lives are we willing to lose here? He asked, his voice low but filled with anger. As many as it takes, Trent replied, his tone unyielding. This isn't just about us. If we fail here, there's nothing left to stop the Krixer. Morgan didn't respond. He knew Trent was right, but the weight of each loss gnawed at him. Every name, every face. They were sacrifices humanity had chosen to make, but they weren't just numbers to him. They were people. As the battle raged on, a new signal came through the comms. This is Commander Ulrich of the Galactic Empire, the voice declared. Reinforcements inbound. Hold your ground, humans. Help is on the way. Morgan felt a flicker of hope, though he kept his expression stoic. On the tactical display, a new fleet emerged from hyperspace. The Empire's ships, battered but resolute. They wasted no time joining the fight, their combined firepower pushing back the swarm. Together, the human and Imperial forces began to turn the tide. The Krixer, though relentless, could not withstand a coordinated assault. One by one, their ships were obliterated, their once mighty swarm reduced to scattered remnants. Finally, as the last Krixer vessel was destroyed, a heavy silence fell over the battlefield. On the bridge of the Erebus, the crew let out a collective breath. Trent allowed himself a rare smile, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "We held the line," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. Morgan nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on the viewport. The cost of victory weighed heavily on him, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Crixer would return, stronger and more determined than ever. And humanity, now a player in this galactic war, had a long road ahead. As the fleet regrouped and began tending to its wounded, Morgan allowed himself a moment of reflection. For all their losses, they had proven one thing beyond doubt. Humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. The galaxy had called them to war, and they had answered with fire. The battle for the Helion cluster had left a scar across the galaxy, but it had also irrevocably shifted the balance of power. The Crixer, once thought to be an unstoppable force, had been thrown back, their pride shattered. The Earth and Galactic Empire alliance had proven itself, but the victory had not come without cost. Morgan stood on the observation deck of the Erebus, his gaze fixed on the distant stars, his mind still wrapped in the chaos of the past days. The battle had been brutal, but the war was far from over. "Admiral Trent is requesting your presence in the war room," came a voice from behind him. It was Lieutenant Carter, his tone clipped and professional. Morgan turned slowly, nodding in acknowledgement. As he made his way to the war room, he passed the crew in their workstations, their faces still pale from the violence they had witnessed and endured. The Erebus was a fortress of metal and human resolve, but even it bore the scars of battle. Morgan's footsteps echoed through the corridors, a reminder of the weight he carried, both as a leader and as a symbol of humanity's newfound place in this galaxy. The war room was alive with activity. Officers and strategists moved swiftly, their conversations punctuated by the hum of active displays and the soft clicking of datapads. Trent stood at the head of the table, staring down at a series of holographic maps that detailed the Crixer's remaining strongholds. Morgan took his seat, his eyes scanning the projections. "We've made significant gains, but we've only scratched the surface," Morgan said, his voice steady but weary. "The Crixer will regroup. They won't let this defeat go unanswered." Trent nodded, his jaw set. "They've never been one for mercy, but we've dealt them a serious blow. They've lost critical supply routes, and their morale is shaken. We've turned the tide, Morgan, but we need to keep the pressure on. We can't give them time to recover." "We will," Morgan replied. "But we also need to consider the long term. The Crixer are not our only enemy in this war. The galaxy's power structure is unstable, and every faction will now be watching us closely. We've made an ally in the Empire, but they have their own agenda." Trent's eyes flickered to Morgan, his voice cautious. "You're concerned about the Empire's next move." "I am," Morgan admitted, "but it's more than that. Humanity's place in this galaxy has changed. We've been thrust into a position of power we've never sought, and that brings its own risks. If we're not careful, we could become just another empire ourselves." The room fell silent, the weight of Morgan's words settling over the table. Humanity had always prided itself on its ideals, on its fight for freedom and justice. But now, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Empire, Morgan wondered if they were risking those very values in the pursuit of survival. "We need to stay focused," Trent said, breaking the silence. "The Crixer are still a threat. We can't afford to lose sight of that." Morgan nodded, but the thought lingered in his mind as the meeting continued. The war would demand more from them, more than they had ever expected to give. And even in victory, the road ahead was uncertain. Weeks passed as the human fleet pressed onward, fighting in skirmishes across the galaxy. The Crixer, though disorganized, never fully retreated. They struck when least expected, leaving planets burning and populations devastated. The war, now in full swing, became a series of endless battles, each one more grueling than the last. The alliance between humanity and the Galactic Empire had solidified, but the fragile nature of their partnership was evident. Both sides were using each other to achieve their own goals, with no illusions of a lasting alliance once the war was won. Morgan stood at the helm of a new campaign, an all-out assault on the Crixer homeworld. The operation was risky, the stakes higher than ever before. Success meant breaking the back of the Crixer war machine. Failure meant complete annihilation. The fleet was assembled, a vast armada of human and imperial ships, prepared to launch an assault on the Crixer homeworld, a planet known only for its horrors. Intelligence reports suggested the Crixer had amassed their final reserves there, ready to make a desperate stand. Morgan stood in the command center of the Erebus, staring at the vast display before him. The map showed the final stretch of space, the dark lines of Crixer space cutting through the stars like a wound. They were about to cross into enemy territory, and no one knew what awaited them on the other side. "Prepare the fleet," Morgan commanded, his voice steady. "We move out in 20 minutes. I want every ship in position before we make the jump." Admiral Trent stood at his side, his features unreadable. "This could be our last strike, Morgan. If we fail, we're fighting for a galaxy that no longer exists." Morgan's gaze hardened. "Then we make sure we don't fail." The fleet moved into position, the immense warships forming a deadly line. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of engines and the tension in the air. The Erebus dropped out of hyperspace, and the Crixer homeworld appeared on the tactical display, a single planet orbiting a dying sun, surrounded by a mass of debris from centuries of war. "Enemy ships detected," Carter called out, his voice tight. "Crixer fleet moving in to intercept." Trent looked at Morgan, his expression grim. "We've prepared for this. Let's end this once and for all." The battle that followed was unlike anything Morgan had ever experienced. The Crixer threw everything they had at the human and Imperial fleets. Their ships were reckless, suicidal even, attacking with no regard for their own survival. But the human fleet was relentless. Each ship, every officer, every soldier fought with the fury of a species that had been given a second chance. The Erebus led the charge, its weapons disintegrating Crixer ships with each shot. Plasma fire rained down on the Crixer homeworld as the fleet moved closer. Morgan's mind was sharp, every decision a matter of life or death, but beneath it all, there was a sense of finality. This was a moment. This was humanity's legacy. As the last of the Crixer defenses crumbled, Morgan knew they had done it. The Crixer were broken. The battle was over. And as the dust settled, the human fleet turned its gaze to the horizon. What would they become now? What would humanity stand for in this new galaxy, where power and influence weighed more heavily than ideals? Trent approached Morgan, his eyes hard but filled with a respect that had been earned through sacrifice. "We've won, Morgan. You've led us to victory." Morgan didn't respond immediately. He looked out at the ruins of the Crixer fleet, his mind caught between the triumph of their success and the uncertainty of what came next. "Victory doesn't mean we've won everything," he said finally. "It only means we've earned the right to shape what comes next, and that is what will define us." The fleet returned to Earth, its ships scarred but victorious. The galaxy, once vast and indifferent, had witnessed the rise of humanity, no longer an isolated, fragile species, but a force to be reckoned with. Morgan knew that humanity's place in the galaxy had irrevocably changed. The question now was not how they would fight, but how they would govern, how they would balance the fire of their weapons with the ideals they had once cherished. They had crossed the line, and now they had to walk it. But Morgan, for the first time in a long while, felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity had proven itself capable of unimaginable things. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of, and the story of humanity's future had only just begun.